Oh gosh, okay, so I just had a super feministy revelation, but it's about the pay gap. Because, I don't know, I'm not sure I do believe in the pay gap, but I think it's really important that any discussion about the pay gap, everyone involved completely understands what it is. And what it is the average difference in wages between men and women. Now that doesn't mean that in the same job men and women will be paid less. It might mean that in similar jobs, for example bin men and cleaners, where they should be paid approximately the same, they're not, or whatever. But that's not what it's about. I mean, in other countries, that is what it's about. Like, that does happen, but not really like Western world. And then, basically, there's quite a big gap between men and women's average wages. And this is basically because of, we don't actually know why it is, but a lot of people say, oh, it's because of motherhood, right? Women often go down to part-time work when they have children or stop working at all, and, that. And anti-pay gap argumenters say oh yeah, well we can't stop women from being mothers, sorry, it's hardly a gap at all if you account for that. And it's yes, but that's the point, because there is a massive inequality in the housework of men and women. So if you survey men and women and you ask them, is it a 50-50 split? Then they'll both say yes, and then you count the hours of work they do, and the woman does twice as much as the man in a heterosexual relationship. And that is despite the amount they work or who's the breadwinner. And in fact, if a man is unemployed, he's less likely to help in the house, which is ridiculous. So the majority of the housework and mental load in the average household falls on the woman. And, part of that is because women feel the pressure to. It's the societal norm. People just fall into it without even thinking about it. It's subconscious. You don't think, oh, I'm going to take on all of the mental load. They just end up doing it. And for me, I worry about that because I was growing up, my parents were very oh, you have to learn how to do housework. My mum had her first child when she was 14 and ran a household from there. So you need to be able to. I was cooking at 6 and cleaning at 7. And I had a boyfriend recently, and he sort of said, well, you're probably going to end up doing all the housework because you're better at it than me. And I just couldn't believe how he would let this system enforced on me. Ooh, crossing the road. So basically, yeah, I couldn't believe that he would allow himself to enforce the system that caused me to have to learn how to do all of that stuff. So he wanted to benefit from that system that made me better. He was oh, well, I'll just not learn. You're better. Weaponized incompetence. I'll just not have to do it then, because you're already better. Why am I better? Because my dad is sexist, that's why. And you're willing to benefit from that? Fine. We're not in a relationship anymore. And I talked to him, and I think we changed our mind. He changed his mind. That's not why we're not in a relationship anymore. We were just different people. That's beside this point. But the interesting thing about that is that even in situations where men do take on more of the household duties, the majority of the time the woman still has the mental load. And the mental load is sort of delegating the tasks, making sure they're done properly, checking if they're done, keeping an eye on things, still doing all the mental work of that job. And, that's difficult, and it's inequality, and it's still hard, it's still work, and it's still not fair. If a man is asking, oh, what can I do? It's what should you be doing? It's tricky. Basically, in an equal relationship, a man shouldn't be asking, what can I do? Because he should already be doing half of the work, and he should already be thinking about it. He shouldn't have to apply to his wife for knowledge of what to do. This video is getting so long. I'm starting to feel like I'm a bit nuts. I don't even know who I'm going to send this to now. So then, the difference in the amount of work and mental load a woman carries between a man when a baby is born dramatically increases. Like, all of a sudden, if you have a baby, you're doing so much more work if you're a woman. On average. I'm not saying every household, but you know, like, the statistics are there. I haven't already mentioned it, but it's kind of obvious that with this high amount of extra unpaid, unrecognised labour, that, you know, there's an increased level of stress and depression and miserableness and initiation of divorce. So as soon as this het couple have a child, the woman has so much more work. So she's going to do less paid work because the man is helping her less in the house. The pay gap starts in the household. I'd say that the cause of this gap is the household and the gap of household chores, the wife work, the mental load, all of it is super important. And for equality, you know, we're pretty far there with putting women in spaces that are dominated by men. You know, there's still way to go, but there's a lot further way to go in putting men in spaces where women dominate. Convincing men that they want to work in primary schools and nurseries is really important, but they aren't going into it, and no one's pushing funds into it and trying to convince them that they should do it. Partially because we haven't really, as a society, got over, you know, masculinity and toxic masculinity, preventing people from doing things because it's not man enough. We've totally got over, you know, femininity holding women back. Well, kind of. I don't know, there's still less women in STEM, you know, we still need to work on it, but yeah, I think it's quite complicated. Part of that is having men feel comfortable in doing housework and stepping up and doing it in their heterosexual relationships, which would then allow women to stay in work. I think women stay in work, I think women stop being in work, not just because of the biological cause, like, obviously you gave birth to it and you're breastfeeding it, but I think they also stay in work because there's so much work to do at home and they're doing all of it. And if they did work, that would just be more work for them. It just makes sense for them to stay at home or go part-time, and there's so much pressure in this culture for them not to miss anything, you know, to be there for everything, to be a good mum, and you can only be a good mum if you're doing all of that work, and that's a ridiculous standard. And I don't really know what needs to change. So much needs to change, but it's so difficult to say how we're going to change it. But I guess we really need to encourage men to get involved in housework and encourage men to go into women-dominated areas and to not worry about their masculinity. And that's so difficult, and I don't really know how that's going to happen. But also, we still need women to feel free of immense pressure to be a good mom and the immense pressure to do everything and to be perfect. Listening to this podcast with this mum, and she was talking about how when she had had 2 children, everything changed for her. Her whole world changed. It was completely different. And for her husband, it hadn't changed at all. He still went out with his friends. That shouldn't be the way it is. That's not fair. That's not equal, and it's not just about the biological aspect of it, is it? There's also a lot of social things going on.